Hello everyone, and welcome to another video Dvar with Rabbi Chaitovsky at BMH-BJ in Denver. This week's Torah portion is the Torah portion of Korach, and a colossal low point here in our early Jewish history during our sojourn in the desert. We just had the episode of the Miraglim, the episode of the spies. We had the episode of the Sabbath violator who had to be put to death for willfully violating Shabbat in public. And now we have this outright mutiny against the leadership of Moshe and Aharon by otherwise, at least partially, a group of upstanding citizens. Korach, who is from the tribe of Levi, Datan and Aviram, we know them as rather checkered figures, as well as a group of 250, they're referred to in the portion as Nisi'ei Eda, Kri'ei Moed Anshe Shem, men of renown and men of great reputation. So a group of people seem to have a complaint, and they come to Moshe and they come to Aharon, and they say to him, Rav Lachem, you have overstepped your bounds. Ki chol ha'edah kulam kadoshim, the entire nation is holy. Uvetocham Hashem, and Hashem resides amidst all of them. Umadua titnasu al kahal Hashem, why have you elevated yourselves above others, above the kahal Hashem, above the community of God? Korach and his followers are wondering why Aaron was elevated to the level of priest and high priest. Like, why do we need that if we're all holy? Sounds like a very interesting and very democratic, if slightly socialist, kind of argument, that we are all equal. Our own Declaration of Independence says that we take it for granted that all men, all people are created equal. It sounds beautiful. Well, that's what they said. The question is, what did they mean? And here is where reading between the lines and listening to our sages and reading and studying Torah with the words of our commentaries really comes to the fore, really is important. Because the commentators look at every aspect of the story, and it's a complex story. And they try to understand what was motivating Korach to mount this mutiny, this insurrection against Moses and Aaron. And they say something very interesting, and it's sort of an oblique comment, and it grows out of a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot tries to help us understand the nature of different kinds of argumentation, the nature of different kinds of conflict. And it labels two different kinds of conflicts. One is a conflict l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, and the other is a conflict that they label shelo l'shem shamayim. And we'll understand those terms in a moment, but let's see who the parties and who the examples of each kind of argument is, and maybe we will be able to understand more intuitively. So the example that the Mishnah gives of an argument l'shem shamayim are the famous arguers throughout the Gemara, throughout the Talmud, Hillel and Shammai. We know Hillel and Shammai agreed on virtually nothing. They argued on everything. And most of the time, Hillel emerges victorious. And yet, Shammai's opinion is still listed because he's part of the tradition. And the Mishnah is willing to give them credit for arguing for the sake of heaven. The Mishnah says that the example of those who argued shelo l'shem shamayim, not for the sake of heaven, are represented by Korach and his followers and the argument that they mounted, the challenge that they mounted against Moshe. Why would they say that? Aside from the fact that the Torah makes it abundantly clear that Korach and his followers were in the wrong, and in a most definitive way, the earth opens up and swallows them to sort of hammer home the point that Korach and his followers are absolutely out of the pale. Aside from that, What was it that made their argument, their challenge, so wrong? And it has to do with the difference between what they said and what they meant. Because while they sounded democratic, and while they sounded the platform of equality for all, and we are all holy, while it sounded great, the rabbis noticed something very interesting. They said, what was Hillel and Shammai's argument about? They were there to search for truth. They wanted to know, what does the Torah demand of us? What is Jewish law? What does the mitzvah mean? How do we put it into practice? And Hillel and Shammai would argue over the details of Jewish law and Jewish practice. It's not to say that one side is actually wrong or one side is actually right, because they're searching for the truth. They're searching for, how do we put the words of Torah into practice? The rabbis imagined that Korach was not searching for the truth. The rabbis, in fact, imagined that Korach was simply looking for power. And why do they say that? Because they look for a hint in the opening of the Torah portion. It says, Vayikach Korach, and then it lists his lineage, Ben Yitzhar, Ben Kahat, Ben Levi. Traces his lineage back to the Levites. And that rather unusual lineage, going back not just to father or to grandfather, but going back even further and to the tribal affiliation, allowed the rabbis to sort of fill in Korach's actual thought process. And they said as follows. Korach says, my father was one of 4 brothers. Amram was first. Of his sons, Aaron was awarded the priesthood and Moses was given kinship. So who's now going to be worthy of receiving the next honor, if not the second brother? Yitzhar's son should have been made prince of the clan, but instead Moses appointed someone else. I should have been appointed. I should be next in line. I am also a member of the tribe of Levi. And I am next in line for a position of leadership. And Korach's democratic claim was actually only a veiled claim, for he should be appointed to a position of power. And he was upset that other people got it. And the same thing the rabbi said holds true for Datan and Aviram. They belong to the tribe of Reuven. We're even told that. And the tribe of Reuven was always seemed to be passed over for positions of leadership. They felt they were entitled to positions of leadership, but passed over. And similarly, the 250 men of renown, they said, we are princes, we are the men of the assembly, we are the leaders, we are also in line for leadership, we should be promoted. Why are they promoted? Each of them came with their own set of desires and wants, each of them arguing for their own self-interest. And while Korach laid it in front of Moses as a democratic idea, the fact is there was already dissension within the ranks of Korach's own followers, because each of them, while they came together, each of them wanted a piece of the pie for themselves. They were not as united as you might otherwise think from a cursory reading of the Torah portion. Hillel and Shammai argue for truth. Korach and his followers argue for power. What is the difference? When you argue for truth, even when one side wins, the other side wins as well, because the truth will out. When you argue about power, when one side wins, the other side most definitely loses. And leadership, in the eyes of the Torah, is not a game of winners and losers. It is actually a game of truth. It is actually a game of all working together for the benefit of the presence of God in the community. And Korach really tried to undermine that, which is why it says, Vayikach Korach. Korach took. he overstepped. He was looking for power. He was not seeking truth. His challenge to Moshe and his challenge to Aaron was simply one of a personal grievance for being overlooked. And that was the same thing with the other parties to the challenge. And they all paid a terrible price because they were seeking power and not truth. Shabbat Shalom.